My name is Leander. For 11 years, I worked a job inside the Federal Bureau of Investigation that most people would never believe was real. I will not tell you the exact location where the last case of my career happened, only that it was a building most Americans have walked through at some point in their lives. You have probably stood in a place just like it yourself, waiting on someone, killing an hour between one store and another. What you never think about is what sits behind the ordinary parts of a place like that. Once the lights go down, the section with no name on any directory, the hallway nobody working retail ever gets shown during training. I was 40 years old, sitting at my kitchen table with a retirement form I had not signed in 3 days, when my phone rang. There is a division inside the Bureau that does not appear on any organizational chart the public will ever see. I will only give you the 4 letters we used for it among ourselves. UIRT. If those letters mean nothing to you, that is exactly how the unit wants it. 11 years in UIRT taught me one thing above everything else. Every rule I was ever handed came from a report filed after somebody broke it first. I did not know it yet, sitting there with my coffee going cold, but the last case of my career was about to test every rule I had ever learned at the same time, and it started with a call I almost let go to voicemail. I picked up on the 4th ring. Control's voice never changed no matter what news came with it. Flat, quick, finished with the pleasantries before they started. Control said, "Leander, I need one more assignment out of you before your paperwork clears." I told Control I already had a form sitting on my table with my own signature missing on purpose. 23 cases in 11 years was the number the Bureau used to measure people in my unit. Regular agents inside the FBI had a mandatory retirement age of 57. Nobody in UIRT ever made it that far doing what we did, so the unit measured us a different way. Confirmed contact incidents. 23 was the number that pulled an agent off active fieldwork, whether he wanted out or not, and I had hit that number 4 months earlier. Control told me this one would not go on my file as case number 24. On paper, I would be listed as a training consultant, nothing more. Off paper, they needed somebody who had lived through enough of these to know what he was looking at before it looked back. I asked where. Control said Cascade View Mall, Eugene, Oregon. I had never worked a mall before. Farmhouses, a shipping yard outside Duluth, a stretch of state highway in New Mexico, a boarded-up hospital wing in Ohio. Never a mall. Something about that detail bothered me more than it should have, and I said so. Control did not answer that directly. Instead, Control gave me the numbers. 6 people missing over 8 months. 2 teenagers who snuck in after closing on a dare and never came back out. A store clerk who vanished during a closing shift with the register still open and her purse still under the counter. An elderly man from a mall walking group who went ahead of his friends around one corner and simply was not on the other side of it, and 2 more whose files I would read on the drive up. Local police had treated every one of these as a separate incident for months. 2 runaway teenagers. An employee who walked off the job without notice. An old man with early memory problems who wandered somewhere he should not have. It took Bureau pattern analysis flagging 6 disappearances tied to the same 80,000 square foot building before anyone connected them. Control told me the entity classification on file read simulation transfer, a designation UIRT used for anything capable of copying the exact appearance, voice, and behavior of a living person or object it had studied closely enough. Mannequin was the specific vessel type in this case. The thing living inside Cascade View Mall did not just hide among the mannequins scattered through the anchor stores. It used them directly, moving through them, controlling them completely, and Control was very specific that nobody in the unit had ever confirmed exactly what happened to a person once the vessel had them. I asked how long the mall itself had been sitting on whatever this was. Cascade View opened in 1992. Before that, the property held a psychiatric facility called Fairview Ridge Sanitarium, in operation since the 1950s. Fairview Ridge closed abruptly in 1990, 2 years before the mall broke ground, after an incident in 1989 that the state never fully explained in any public record. Control's briefing named a superintendent, Dr. Marcus Kellerman, who had been running an unauthorized treatment program using rooms lined with mirrors, a method he called confrontation therapy, meant to force patients to face fractured versions of their own reflection until whatever he believed was broken in them supposedly reintegrated. Nothing about that program had ever been approved by any licensing board. In the fall of 1989, during a session, Kellerman ran after hours without staff oversight. 4 patients and 1 orderly went missing from a locked wing. Kellerman was found the next morning sitting in the mirrored room alone, unable to explain what had happened to any of them, and he never practiced psychiatry again. The facility closed within a year. Nobody ever recovered the 4 patients or the orderly. When Cascade View Mall was built, the basement level of one anchor wing sat directly on top of what used to be that locked wing's foundation, since demolishing it fully had proven more expensive than building around it. I sat with that for a moment before Control kept going. In 2019, 3 years before the current wave of disappearances started, 2 junior agents from my unit were sent in after an earlier, smaller string of vanishings connected to the same building. Agent Coyle and Agent Vance, both experienced, both good at the job. They filed one check-in report after their first night on site, and then nothing. Search teams found their vehicle still in the employee lot, both cell phones inside it, no other trace. The case went cold and stayed cold for years, filed as unresolved, until this new cycle of disappearances forced the Bureau to reopen it. There was one more name Control gave me before the call ended that first day. Felix Morrow, a civilian researcher UIRT had contracted after Coyle and Vance disappeared. Someone with a background in folklore documentation rather than field agent training, sent in specifically to observe and record rather than engage. Morrow kept a journal. He documented 12 days on site before he stopped checking in. Control gave me one instruction about that journal with more weight behind it than anything else in the briefing. If I found it, I was allowed to read every page except the last one. The last page I was ordered to burn without reading. I asked why. Control said only that the order came from higher than either of us, and that it was not open for discussion. 2 days later, I drove to the regional office in Portland to meet the partner I had been assigned. Her name was Delphine. She was 29 years old, and she had already spent 2 full years researching this specific case before anyone paired her with me, going through old sanitarium records, county death certificates, newspaper archives on microfilm, anything that touched Fairview Ridge or Cascade View. When I asked why this particular case had held her attention that long, she gave me an answer that was shorter than I expected and told me nothing more than the surface of it. She said her mother used to work security at that mall. I did not push past that the first day. I would learn the rest of it later, in a place and at an hour I would not have chosen if the choice had been mine. Before I left Portland, Control sent the rules to my tablet, 7 of them. I copied everyone by hand into a small notebook I had carried through all 23 of my prior cases, because typed instructions never stayed with me the way handwriting did. Rule 1 was not given to me as a clean sentence. The screen showed notes about hours, 2 in the morning until 4 in the morning, described as the window when whatever lived in that building operated at its strongest, and instructions to remain inside a secured room with the door shut until 4 o'clock arrived, no matter what happened outside that door before then. Rule 2 showed only a header. Rule number 2, nothing followed it. No text, no notes, no redaction marks, just empty space where a rule should have been. I asked Control about it directly. Control said there was nothing to explain, and the subject never came up again for the rest of the case. Rule 3 read clean and exact. No reflective surfaces after dark. Rule 4 read the same way, do not follow the voice. Rule 5 came back to me the way Rule 1 had, through notes rather than a clean line. Pages describing mannequins, timing, and the fact that direct observation seemed to prevent movement entirely, though nobody had ever written a single tidy sentence that summarized the whole idea. Whatever discipline had produced these rules had apparently found this one too complicated to compress. Rule 6 was short, the basement is a restricted area. Rule 7 was the longest of all 7, and the only one besides 3, 4, and 6 given in full. It read, Felix Morrow followed every rule for 11 days. On the 12th day he broke rule number 5. If his journal is recovered, do not read the final page under any circumstance. Burn it. I copied that one twice, checking my own handwriting against the screen both times, and I sat with it longer than I sat with any of the others. Delphine met me at the regional office 2 mornings later, with a banker's box of case files already organized by date. She had cut her research down to the 6 current victims first, since that was the piece the Bureau needed moving fastest. Ashley Prentice and Cody Baumgardner, both 17, had gone into the mall after closing through a service door Cody's older brother worked behind, on a dare neither of them had told anyone about beforehand. Wanda Fitch, 44, had been closing alone at the J.C. Penney register the night she disappeared, her purse and car keys left untouched under the counter. Harold Voss, 71, walked mall laps with 4 other retirees 3 mornings a week before the stores opened, and on the morning he vanished, he had rounded one corner ahead of the group and was simply gone by the time the others reached the same spot. The last 2 names on the list, a stockroom worker and a teenage mall employee on his lunch break, followed the same pattern as the others closely enough that Delphine did not spend long on either of them. Different ages, different jobs, different reasons for being inside that building. and every one of them gone without a mark left behind. We spent the morning checking gear: flashlights, spare batteries, a digital recorder, a thermal imaging unit small enough to fit inside a jacket pocket, about 4 inches wide, and two-way radios set to a channel nobody else in the building would be using. When Delphine packed a small hand mirror into her bag, the kind meant for checking makeup, I told her to leave it in the car. She asked why. I told her it was Rule 3, nothing more, and she looked at me like she expected an explanation to follow. None came because I did not have one to give her. She left it in the car without arguing further, though I could tell it cost her something to do that without being told why it mattered. We ate lunch at a diner 2 blocks from the office. Delphine asked me directly how a person spends 11 years following rules that never come with reasons attached. I told her the honest version. Every rule in this line of work exists because a report got filed after somebody found out the hard way what happens without it. I had never once seen a rule proven wrong by following it. I had seen plenty proven right by somebody who did not. She said that sounded like a hard way to live, taking orders from people who never explain themselves. I told her it was, and that most agents who lasted more than 2 or 3 cases in this unit eventually stopped needing the explanations, because by then they had usually seen enough to understand why the explanations stopped coming. Some things are easier to survive if you never fully understand them while you are standing inside them. Sunlight came through the diner window at an angle just as I said that, catching the glass surface of a framed photograph on the wall across from our booth. Both of us went still for half a second, watching the reflection there longer than either of us meant to, before we caught ourselves and went back to eating. Neither of us mentioned it out loud. It was still daylight. Rule 3 had no hold on us yet, not for another several hours, but something about the reflex to freeze at a flash of glass had already planted itself in both of us before we ever set foot inside Cascade View Mall. Delphine paid for lunch. On the walk back to the car, she told me she had spent those 2 years working a desk position inside UIRT's records division, filing requests for anything connected to Fairview Ridge and Cascade View on her own time, long before anyone authorized her for fieldwork. Nobody assigned her that research. She built the file herself, 1 records request at a time, because the unit system flagged her mother's name in an old missing persons report tied to the same property, and once she saw that connection, she said she could not make herself stop pulling the thread. She told me she had requested this case herself twice, before UIRT finally approved pairing her with an agent close enough to retirement that losing him would not cost the unit years of future service. I asked if that bothered her, being handed off to someone on his way out the door. She said no. She said she would rather work with somebody who had already survived 23 of these than somebody who still had something left to prove. I did not tell her yet that surviving 23 cases had never once made the 24th easier. Some rules do not need a reason to hold power over you. They only need enough of your attention that you stop asking for one. The drive from Portland to Eugene runs about 110 miles down Interstate 5, close to 2 hours if traffic cooperates. Delphine drove the first hour. I used that time to read through Felix Morrow's journal. The copy control had forwarded ahead of us, everything except whatever waited on that final page I had already been ordered never to look at. Morrow wrote in short, careful entries, dated by day number rather than calendar date, as if he had decided early on that keeping track of the outside world's calendar no longer mattered as much as keeping track of how long he had been inside that building. By day 4, he had already noticed something about the mannequins in the anchor stores. Every time he checked one storefront window while looking directly at a display, nothing moved. Every time his attention shifted away, even for a few seconds, something in the arrangement had changed by the time he looked back. A raised arm lowered, a head turned 2 or 3 degrees further than before. Nothing dramatic enough on its own to prove anything to somebody who had not been watching as closely as he had, but consistent enough across 11 straight days that Morrow had stopped doubting what his own eyes were telling him by day 6. I read that passage twice before Delphine asked what I'd found. I read it to her out loud, and neither of us said much after that for a while. We reached Cascade View Mall a little before 1 in the afternoon. 2 levels, anchored on one end by Sears and on the other by JCPenney, with roughly 60 smaller storefronts between them, half of them still operating, the other half sitting behind metal gates with faded lease signs taped to the glass. Mall management had been told only that federal consultants were reviewing security concerns tied to recent incidents, nothing more specific than that. The one person briefed with slightly more detail was a security guard named Grady Boone, mid-30s, the only overnight guard still willing to work that shift after 4 of his co-workers had quit in the past year without giving much of a reason. Grady met us at the employee entrance with his arms crossed, and an expression that told me exactly what he thought about federal consultants before either of us said a word. He said, "I've heard about you people. No offense, but I've worked nights here 2 years, and the worst thing I've seen is a raccoon that got into the food court through a vent." I told him that was fine, and that we would try to keep out of his way. He said, "I got a wife and a kid at home. Eli's 4. I work nights so I can be around during the day, and I'm not interested in anybody's ghost stories costing me hours I don't have to spare." I told him I understood completely, and that whatever we found or didn't find, we would try to keep this short. He softened slightly at that, enough to walk us through to the kiosk near Center Court that Mal records listed as decommissioned 5 years earlier. That was where Delphine found the original placard, an aluminum sign about the size of a cafeteria tray, bolted to the inside wall of the kiosk booth, listing 7 rules in the same order Control had sent us, along with a spiral notebook tucked behind a loose panel that turned out to be Felix Morrow's actual handwritten journal. Not just the digital copy we had already read. We spent the rest of the daylight hours doing a full inventory of every mannequin in both anchor stores, 43 total between Sears and JCPenney, photographing each one's exact position, down to the angle of the head and the placement of the hands. By 4 in the afternoon, on our second pass through JCPenney's second floor, one mannequin near the women's section had rotated roughly 45 degrees from its position in our first photograph, taken only 90 minutes earlier. Nobody had touched it. No employee had been in that section during the gap. Delphine checked the timestamp on both photographs twice before she said anything, and when she did, her voice had dropped lower than it had been all day. Behind the food court, past a service corridor employees rarely used, we found a metal gate marked as basement access, propped open roughly 6 inches, though Mal records showed no scheduled maintenance work below that level in over a year. A thin, tinny melody drifted up from somewhere past that gate, the kind of tune a child's music box plays when it winds down slower than it should, stretching each note longer than the last. Neither of us went closer to it that afternoon. Control's instructions for day 1 were specific on that point before we ever left Portland. Upper floors only, until dark, and then straight into the security office once the sun went down. We set up our base of operations in the Mal's central security office, a windowless room lined with monitors showing feeds from every camera in the building. The first thing I did once the sun dropped below the tree line outside was cover every reflective surface in that room, a small mirror mounted near the coat rack, the dark glass face of a powered-off television bolted to the wall, even the glossy black surface of a filing cabinet that caught light a little too well for my comfort. I taped cardboard over each one. Delphine asked whether the monitors themselves counted. I told her they were fine as long as we looked at the picture on the screen and not at the frame around it, the same principle as looking at a photograph without treating the glass covering it as a mirror. She accepted that distinction without much argument, though I noticed she kept her eyes moving toward the monitor frames anyway more than once that night, the same reflex we had both caught ourselves doing back in that diner. By 1 in the morning, the temperature in the security office had dropped enough that I could see my own breath, despite the thermostat on the wall still reading 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Delphine noticed it at the same moment I did, both of us watching small clouds form and fade every time either of us exhaled. At 2, right on schedule with what Control's notes described, footsteps started somewhere down the main corridor outside our office door. Slow, even deliberate, the kind of pace a person walks when they are in no hurry and have nowhere else to be. They came closer for a stretch of maybe 30 seconds, then faded back the way they came, then returned again 10 minutes later, always along the same path, always at the same unhurried pace. Around 3:30, a new sound joined the footsteps, a soft, repeating knock against the door frame, 3 taps, a pause, 3 more taps, over and over without variation. Delphine's hand moved toward the doorknob about 20 minutes before 4 o'clock arrived, her fingers wrapping around it before I noticed what she was doing. I said her name once, sharp enough to cut through whatever had pulled her attention toward that door, and she stopped with her hands still on the knob, looking at me like she had just surfaced from somewhere much deeper than the last few seconds should have allowed. I told her Rule 1 existed for exactly this reason, and that whatever was on the other side of that door wanted nothing more than for one of us to open it before 4 o'clock arrived. She let go of the knob. We watched the digital clock on the desk together in silence until it read 4:00. The knocking stopped the instant the last digit changed. The footsteps did not return again that night. Neither of us spoke for a while after that. When Delphine finally did, she said only that she did not remember deciding to reach for that door, that one moment she had been sitting across from me, and the next her hand had already been moving. I told her that was worth remembering, because it meant whatever we were dealing with here did not need to convince a person outright. It only needed to borrow a few seconds of their attention while they were tired enough not to notice it happening. We used the daylight hours of our second day to rest in shifts and to walk the mall's public areas as if we were nothing more than two consultants reviewing security cameras, since a handful of employees and a scattering of shoppers still moved through the parts of the building that had never had trouble attached to them. Grady found us near the food court around noon, less hostile than he had been the day before, willing at least to sit across from us with a cup of coffee from the kiosk that still operated near the east entrance. He asked what we had found so far. I told him only that we had confirmed some unusual activity worth continuing to investigate, nothing more specific than that, since Control's protocol did not authorize disclosing details about the case to Mal staff outside of basic safety instructions. He said that was the kind of answer he expected from federal consultants, and he laughed a little when he said it, though there was less confidence behind that laugh than there had been the day before. He told us he had heard the knocking too, more than once over the past several months, always somewhere between 2 and 4 in the morning, and that he had always assumed it was pipes settling or the building shifting the way old buildings do. He said his co-workers who quit had all mentioned something similar before they left, though none of them had stayed long enough to explain exactly what pushed them out the door for good. I told him that if he heard anything unusual that night, anything at all, the safest thing he could do was stay exactly where he was and radio the security office rather than investigate it himself. He nodded at that, though I could tell from his expression that 2 years of quiet overnight shifts had built a kind of confidence in him that a single afternoon conversation was not going to undo completely. Night fell again around 8:30. Delphine and I returned to the security office, resealed every reflective surface we had covered the night before, and settled in for what we expected to be a repeat of the same pattern, footsteps and knocking until 4 o'clock, nothing more. At 12:40, the radio on the desk crackled to life on the channel Grady used for his rounds, though Grady's voice was not the one that came through it. A woman's voice said, "Delphine, little bird." Delphine went rigid across from me. She told me later that Little Bird had been her mother's name for her as a toddler, a name nobody outside her immediate family had ever used, a name that had never once appeared in any case file, any newspaper article, any record Delphine had spent 2 years combing through. She said her mother's name out loud before I could stop her. Renee. The voice on the radio answered back immediately, using details a stranger could never have known. It described the kitchen in a house Delphine had lived in as an infant, a house sold decades earlier, a yellow curtain over a window above the sink, a record player in the corner of the living room. It told Delphine that her mother was close by, that she had been waiting a very long time, that all she needed was for Delphine to come find her. Delphine stood up from her chair with the radio still in her hand, already moving toward the office door before I reached her. I told her I understood, and that I believed every word she had just heard mattered to her more than almost anything else in her life, and that none of it changed what Rule 4 meant right now. Do not follow the voice. I told her that whatever was speaking through that radio had spent 28 years, if her mother truly had been taken from this building in 1994, the way I suspected from the way she said the name, learning everything it needed to sound exactly right. She stopped at the door, her hand on the frame, breathing hard, and told me that this was the reason she had spent 2 years building a file on this building before anyone let her near it in person. Her mother had worked mal security here on the overnight shift and had disappeared during a shift in 1994 when Delphine was barely a year old. Delphine had grown up on stories and a handful of photographs, raised mostly by her grandmother. With almost nothing solid connecting her to the woman in those pictures, beyond a case file that never closed. I told her I was sorry and that I meant it, and that the version of her mother speaking through that radio right now was not something we could trust, no matter how much it sounded like the real thing. She did not open that door. She stood with her back against it for several minutes, tears running down her face without a sound coming with them, until the voice on the radio finally stopped calling her name and the channel went quiet again. At 2:15, a new sound came through the Mal's public address system, the one used for store announcements and holiday music, switching on by itself with a soft click before a man's voice filled the empty corridors outside our office. Felix Morrow's voice, reading aloud from what sounded like journal entries almost identical to the ones we had already read, day counts, observations about mannequins, small details about weather and meals that matched his handwriting closely enough that for a moment I nearly answered back. Then I caught it. The voice described day 9 as a Tuesday. I had read that entry twice on the drive up. Morrow's own handwriting listed day 9 as a Thursday. a small detail, the kind of thing an actual person might misremember months later while recounting a story from memory, but something no accurate recording or genuine echo of Morrow himself should have gotten wrong while reading directly from the source material. I did not respond to the voice. I sat with my hand over the radio's transmit button and said nothing at all until the recitation stopped on its own, 20 minutes later, mid-sentence, as if whatever was producing it had simply lost interest in continuing without a response to feed on. At 3:10, Grady's voice came through on the correct channel, his actual voice this time, tight and fast in a way I had not heard from him yet. He said, "I got something on camera 3, West Corridor by the old Sears entrance. Somebody's back there, looks like a kid maybe." I told him to stay exactly where he was and describe what he saw rather than approach it. He did not answer right away. When he came back on the radio 30 seconds later, his voice had changed completely, quieter, unsteady. He said, "That's not possible, that sounds like my sister." He told us, fast and disjointed, that his younger sister had died 6 years earlier in a car accident outside Salem, and that the voice coming from somewhere past camera 3 had just called him by the nickname only she had ever used for him. I told him to stay at his post immediately, that whatever he was hearing was not his sister, and that Delphine and I were on our way to his position right then. I grabbed the recorder and my flashlight and moved fast, Delphine close behind me, both of us covering the distance from the security office to the West Corridor in under 2 minutes. Grady's radio went silent 30 seconds before we reached the corridor. When we got there, his flashlight lay on the floor near the entrance to the old Sears wing, still switched on, rolling in a slow half circle from where it must have dropped. His radio sat beside it, powered on, transmitting nothing but a faint static hiss. There was no sign of Grady himself anywhere along that corridor, not in either direction, not behind the nearest mannequin display, not through the propped door leading into the Sears stockroom. We searched for 20 minutes without finding anything more than his equipment and a single scuff mark on the tile floor leading toward the back of the store, stopping abruptly a few yards short of a mannequin display near the men's section, as if whatever had made that mark had simply stopped needing to leave any more of a trail. I radioed control at 4:15 once the danger window had passed and gave a full report. Control's response came back within a minute, flat and immediate, the same tone control used for everything. Control said, confirmed, containment failure. Local security guard Grady Boone, unaccounted for as of 04:15 hours. I asked what happened next procedurally, for a man with a wife and a 4-year-old son waiting for him at home. Control said that malmanagement would be told Grady had failed to report for his shift, that a missing persons report would be filed through normal channels within 24 hours, and that the Bureau's involvement in this case would remain unlisted in any public record connected to his name. I sat with the radio in my hand for a long time after that transmission ended, and neither Delphine nor I said much of anything else before the sun came up. We spent the better part of the next day inside the security office, reviewing every hour of footage the building's camera system had recorded since our arrival, sped up at first, then slowed down frame by frame across any stretch where something looked worth a second pass. Neither of us talked much while we worked. The previous night had taken something out of both of us that a full day of daylight had not fully returned yet. Delphine kept a legal pad next to the keyboard, marking timestamps in neat columns, her handwriting steadier than I expected given everything she had been through only hours earlier. By early afternoon, a pattern emerged across 4 separate camera feeds covering different sections of both anchor stores. Every camera in the building suffered a brief burst of static, never longer than 4 or 5 seconds, at completely unpredictable intervals throughout the night, never following any schedule we could identify, never affecting every camera at once. What made the pattern worth marking down was what happened immediately after each burst cleared. In 11 separate instances across the footage, a mannequin visible in frame before the static had shifted position by the time the picture returned, always by small amounts, a tilted head, a raised hand lowered, a foot turned a few degrees, and always in a direction that could not be explained by anything else moving through frame during the gap. The 11th instance stopped both of us cold. A mannequin near the back corner of JCPenney's junior section, one that had not appeared anywhere in our inventory photographs from the first day, wore a wig cut and styled to match Delphine's own hairstyle almost exactly, along with a jacket similar enough in color and cut to one Delphine had packed for this trip that she checked her own bag to confirm it was still there. It was. Whatever this was, it had built its copy from something other than direct theft. Delphine sat very still in front of that frame for a long moment before speaking. She said, "It's been watching me specifically, not just anyone who walks through this building." I told her that matched everything Morrow's journal described about how this thing operated, that it seemed to require close observation over time before it could copy anything convincingly, whether that was a voice, a face, or a name only one person in the world would recognize. We tracked that same mannequin across 6 more instances of camera, static throughout the recorded footage, and in every single one, its new position placed it just outside the direct view of whichever camera would otherwise have caught it moving, close enough to the edge of frame that a person glancing quickly at a monitor might never notice how carefully it had positioned itself to stay just beyond full observation. No attack came from any of this. Nothing lunged toward a camera or reached for anyone in frame. The entire 11 hours of footage held nothing more than small, careful, repeated repositioning, patient in a way that unsettled me more than anything overtly violent could have. Whatever this was clearly understood exactly how much it needed to stay hidden, and exactly how far it could push that boundary without giving itself away completely. Buried further back in the archive, in footage timestamped from 2019, we found 11 seconds of grainy video showing 2 agents in plain clothes, presumably Coyle and Vance, standing in that same J.C. Penney Jr. section during what the timestamp read as 2:40 in the morning. The footage cut to static before either agent moved, and when the picture returned, the corridor behind them stood empty. No further footage from that assignment existed anywhere in the archive. Whatever system had once stored the rest of it had either failed or been wiped clean years before either of us ever set foot in this building. I thought about Morrow's journal entries again, the ones describing his own growing certainty across 11 days that something was tracking his attention specifically, learning his patterns, waiting for a moment his focus slipped. On the 12th day, according to Rule 7, he had broken the rule about direct observation. Whatever its exact wording had been, I did not yet know precisely what that break had looked like in the moment, but sitting there watching a mannequin built to look like my partner reposition itself with patient precision across 11 separate gaps in the footage, I understood for the first time exactly how easily 11 days of vigilance could wear a person down to the one unguarded moment that cost them everything. Delphine closed her legal pad around 4 in the afternoon and said she needed air. We stepped outside into the employee parking lot for a few minutes, standing in ordinary daylight beside ordinary cars, and neither of us spoke about what we had just spent the day watching. When we went back inside, she asked whether I thought that mannequin had been built for something specific, rather than just built as another disguise. I told her I thought something was being prepared, and that whatever it was, it likely connected to whatever had happened tomorrow, though I could not yet say exactly how. We returned to the basement gate a little after 9 that evening, well before the 2 o'clock window control's notes had flagged as the most dangerous stretch of night. The gate sat exactly where we had left it 2 days earlier, propped open the same 6 inches, as if nothing behind it had moved in all that time. The music box melody drifted up through the gap more clearly than it had on our first afternoon there, no longer faint, carrying now through the ventilation system in a way that made it impossible to pin down exactly how far below us it originated. Delphine pressed her palm flat against the metal grate covering a nearby vent and told me she could feel the sound as much as hear it, a faint vibration running through the metal in time with each slow note. Control's instructions for the basement remained unchanged from the very first briefing. Restricted access. Rule 6 stated plainly, no interpretation required. I radioed in twice that night asking for authorization to at least open the gate fully and look down the stairwell beyond it, and twice Control refused, giving no additional reason beyond a flat repetition of the same rule. We sat on 2 folding chairs we had carried down from the security office, positioned a safe distance back from the gate itself, and we waited. For nearly 3 hours, nothing happened beyond the melody itself, rising and falling at no fixed interval, sometimes stretching a single note out for what felt like a full minute before the next one started. Delphine talked during some of that waiting, more than she had the entire trip up to that point. She told me about growing up without her mother, raised by her grandmother in a small house outside Springfield, about a shoebox of photographs that had been the only physical connection she had to a woman she could not actually remember, since she had been too young when Renee disappeared to form any memories of her own. She told me she used to imagine, as a kid, that her mother had simply walked away from her old life rather than actually vanishing, and that some nights it had been easier to be angry at an imagined version of her mother who chose to leave than to sit with the truth that nobody knew what had actually happened to her. Somewhere around 2:40, Delphine asked if I had ever come close to breaking one of these rules myself across all 23 of my prior cases. I told her the truth, that I had come close exactly once, years earlier in a case involving a decommissioned lighthouse on the Oregon coast, when a rule about answering a specific radio frequency had nearly cost me everything before another agent physically pulled the headset off my ears at the last second. I I told her that surviving this work rarely came down to being smarter or braver than whatever you were up against. Most of the time it came down to somebody else noticing, before you did, that you had already started slipping. I did not offer much beyond that in response to what she had told me about her mother. Some things do not need a reply. They only need somebody willing to sit next to you while you say them out loud. Around midnight, the melody stopped entirely for close to 10 minutes, the longest silence either of us had heard from that stairwell since we arrived. Then once a single soft knock sounded against the far side of the gate itself, low, almost gentle, followed immediately by silence again. Neither of us moved toward it. We sat with that silence for the rest of the night, all the way through the 2 to 4 window, without another sound reaching us from below. At 4:15, once the danger window had passed, I radioed control one final time that night, describing exactly what we had heard and asking directly what was being contained beneath that gate. Control's answer came back the same as always. The basement remains restricted. That instruction does not change based on curiosity, patience, or anything either of us heard tonight. I asked Control, off the record, whether Control actually knew the answer, or was simply following an order handed down from somewhere higher, without ever being told the reason either. Control did not answer that question at all. The channel went quiet, and neither of us pushed the subject further that night. Control called a final briefing the next morning before we made any decision about what came next. I sat in the Mal's small employee break room, with the tablet propped against a napkin dispenser, Delphine across from me, both of us running on less sleep than either would have admitted out loud. Control read Rule 7 in full over the call, the same words I had already copied into my notebook back in Portland, though hearing them spoken instead of read felt heavier somehow. Control said Felix Morrow followed every rule for 11 days. On the 12th day he broke rule number 5. If his journal is recovered, do not read the final page under any circumstance. Burn it. I told Control we had recovered the journal from the kiosk on our first day, and that it currently sat inside my bag, sealed the way I had found it, final page untouched. Control told me to burn it before we left the property, regardless of what else happened before then. After the call ended, I sat with that journal in my hands for longer than I want to admit. Some part of me wanted badly to know what Morrow had written on that last page, whether it explained what happened to him, whether it named the thing we were dealing with, whether it might tell us something that would make the rest of this case easier to survive. I understood, sitting there, exactly how a person ends up breaking a rule they know better than to break, not through carelessness. Through the same quiet, reasonable-sounding voice that convinces you just this once will not cost what it cost everybody else. I closed the journal without opening past the second to last page, and I told Delphine we would burn it together before we left, exactly as instructed. She nodded, though her eyes had already drifted toward the bank of monitors along the break room wall, the same live feeds we had spent the previous day reviewing frame by frame. She said my name in a voice that had gone very quiet, and pointed at the monitor showing camera 9, the basement stairwell feed we had never had authorization to view live before that morning, since Control's restriction had applied to the physical space rather than the camera feed itself, and neither of us had thought to check it until now. The image showed a woman standing motionless at the bottom of the stairwell, facing away from the camera, surrounded by what looked like a wide ring of standing mirrors, arranged in a rough circle around a single mannequin positioned at the center. Older and more weathered than any of the ones we had catalogued upstairs, its surface dulled beneath a thick layer of grime that had clearly built up over decades. Delphine recognized her mother before I said a word. She knew the posture, the set of the shoulders, something in the shape of her that had apparently survived 28 years exactly enough for a daughter who had never known her to still recognize her on sight. Renee was alive, standing, breathing based on the slow rise and fall visible even through grainy security footage. 28 years after she disappeared from a security shift in this same building, she was still down there, close enough to that basement gate that the melody we had listened to for hours the night before had likely been coming from somewhere near where she stood. I thought about Delphine's grandmother, raising a granddaughter on nothing but photographs and a case file that never closed, and I thought about every year that had passed with a family believing the worst outcome had already happened when the truth had been considerably crueler than that, a woman alive the entire time, close enough to reach. Kept from the people who loved her by something none of us yet fully understood. I radioed Control immediately with what we had found. Control's response took longer to come back than any answer had taken across the entire case so far. When it finally came, Control said only that this changed the operational picture and authorized us to proceed past Rule 6 for the first time since the case began, though not until the current danger window had passed. 4 in the morning, the same threshold that had protected us every night so far, would need to clear before we went anywhere near that gate. I looked at Delphine across that break room table. Neither of us said much for a while. Whatever came next was not going to be something either of us walked into unprepared, not after everything the last 4 days had already cost this case. We waited out the rest of that danger window inside the break room without sleeping, both of us watching the clock more closely than either of us watched anything else in the room. At 4 o'clock exactly, I radioed Control one final time, confirming we were moving toward the basement gate. Control's only response was a single word: proceed. The gate gave easily when I pulled it open the rest of the way, no resistance beyond its own weight. Whatever had kept it propped at exactly 6 inches for 4 straight days seemed to have simply been waiting for permission rather than holding it shut deliberately. A metal stairwell descended below us, lit only by our flashlights, the music box melody now clear enough that I could make out individual notes for the first time. A simple, repetitive tune that felt almost familiar, though neither Delphine nor I could place where we might have heard it before. The stairwell opened into a wide, low-ceilinged room that must have once been part of Fairview Ridge Sanitarium's original foundation. Concrete walls unfinished and stained with decades of moisture, exposed pipes running along the ceiling in patterns that predated the mall built above by at least 40 years. 7 full-length mirrors stood arranged in a loose circle at the center of that room, each one old enough that their silvering had degraded into dark, uneven patches. And at the center of that ring stood the oldest mannequin either of us had seen yet, its paint worn away almost entirely, its features barely distinguishable beneath that same thick layer of grime. Renee stood just outside the ring, exactly where the camera feed had shown her, dressed in a security uniform decades out of style, faded to the point that the original color was difficult to determine. She did not turn when we entered. She did not appear to breathe any differently than she had on camera, slow and steady, a woman who had been standing in that exact spot for so long that stillness itself had become natural to her. Delphine said her mother's name once, quietly, and took a step toward her before I put a hand on her arm to stop her. The voice that answered did not come from Renee's mouth in any way that matched normal speech. It came from somewhere behind her, or perhaps from all 7 mirrors at once, low and layered, carrying just enough of Renee's actual voice underneath it to make the effect worse rather than better. It said, "Little bird, you found your way here after all." Delphine's whole body had gone rigid beside me. I kept my hand on her arm, and I told the room out loud that we were not here to negotiate. The voice answered anyway. It told us that Renee could be returned exactly as she had been in 1994, unchanged, unaged, restored completely to the woman in Delphine's photographs. If we simply turned around and left this room exactly as we found it, the mirrors intact, the gate resealed, the arrangement left undisturbed for however long it needed to remain that way. It told Delphine that 28 years of waiting could end tonight, that all it required in exchange was patience a little while longer, and silence about what we had seen. I told Delphine, quietly, not to answer it. She did not answer it. Her hands were shaking hard enough that I could see it even in the low light, but she stayed where she was. I told the voice that we already knew better than to trust an offer like that, since nothing that operated the way this thing had operated for the better part of 4 days, mimicking voices, learning names nobody outside a family should have known, waiting patiently behind camera static for the right moment to move, was ever going to release something it had held onto for 28 years without taking something else in return. The temperature in that room dropped hard and fast the moment I said that, colder than either night we had spent upstairs. The mannequin at the center of the ring turned its head, slow and deliberate, toward us for the first time, and the 7 mirrors around it began reflecting movement that did not match anything actually happening in the room, shapes passing behind our own reflected images, quick and low, gone again before either of us could focus on them directly. Renee's body turned to face us fully for the first time. Her eyes were open, but there was nothing behind them that looked aware of where she stood or who stood in front of her. The attack came fast once it started. Something forced Renee's body forward, faster than a woman her age should have been able to move, hands reaching for Delphine directly, and I got between them hard enough to knock all 3 of us sideways into the edge of the mirror circle. One of the 7 mirrors cracked along its base from the impact, and the moment it did, the layered voice screamed in a way that had nothing human left in it at all. I grabbed the nearest solid object within reach, a length of rusted pipe lying against the wall, and swung it into the cracked mirror hard enough to shatter it completely. The room lurched, every remaining mirror flickering with distorted reflections all at once, and Delphine, recovering fast, grabbed a second length of pipe from the same pile and went after the mirror closest to her. We worked through them one at a time after that, moving fast, staying close enough together that neither of us faced Renee's body alone for more than a few seconds at a stretch. Each mirror we broke made the layered voice weaker, thinner, less able to hold itself together across whatever remained standing. By the fifth mirror, Renee's body had stopped moving toward us entirely, standing frozen mid-motion. Whatever had been directing her seemed to be losing its grip on the connection already. The sixth mirror put up the hardest fight, some kind of resistance pushing back against the pipe each time I swung, until Delphine added her own strength to mine, and we broke it together on the third attempt. The seventh and final mirror stood directly behind the center mannequin itself. I crossed that room with Delphine right behind me, and I swung the pipe through that last mirror with everything I had left. It shattered completely, the layered voice cut off entirely, all at once, severed completely rather than fading down gradually. The mannequin at the center of the ring collapsed forward onto the concrete floor, nothing more than an old, hollow shell once whatever had animated it let go. Renee collapsed at the same moment, and Delphine caught her before she hit the ground, lowering her mother gently onto the concrete, checking for a pulse with hands that would not stop shaking even as she found one, steady and real, beating beneath skin that had somehow stayed alive through 28 years none of us yet understood. Renee's eyes moved, slowly, but they moved, tracking toward Delphine's face for the first time since we had entered that room, recognition flickering somewhere behind them even though her body remained almost entirely still otherwise. We got paramedics into that basement within 20 minutes of my emergency call going out, and Renee was evaluated over the following days at a hospital in Eugene, where doctors described her condition using a term I had heard before, but never expected to hear applied to somebody I had just watched get rescued from a mal basement. Locked-in syndrome, a condition where a person remains fully conscious and aware while almost entirely unable to move or speak, usually caused by damage to the brainstem. Nobody could say for certain what 28 years near that ring of mirrors had done to cause it, only that her case matched the clinical picture closely enough that doctors felt confident calling it exactly that. She could track movement with her eyes. She could, with significant effort, move 2 fingers on her right hand. Speech remained entirely out of reach for now, though her physicians were cautiously optimistic that some further recovery might still be possible with time and therapy. Given that nobody had ever documented a case quite like this one to compare it against. Control confirmed containment success within 24 hours of the incident. The basement level was sealed permanently under a different set of federal authorizations than the ones that had gotten us down there in the first place, and Cascade View Mal's ownership group was given a story about structural concerns serious enough to justify closing that section indefinitely, which was close enough to true that nobody involved needed to say much more than that. 3 weeks later, back in Portland, the Bureau held a small retirement ceremony for me in a conference room that normally hosted budget meetings. No large crowd, no formal speeches beyond a short one from my unit supervisor, mostly just people I had worked alongside over 11 years standing around a sheet cake somebody had ordered from a grocery store bakery. Delphine came. So did 2 agents I had trained early in my career, both still active, both looking at me the way younger agents look at somebody who made it all the way to the finish line in a job that rarely lets people finish at all. That night, back at my apartment, I opened my notebook to add a final entry closing out the case file, the same notebook I had carried through all 24 cases now, counting this last one whether the Bureau's paperwork acknowledged it or not. Between my copy of Rule 7 and the blank page where I intended to write my closing notes, I found 4 lines of handwriting I did not remember writing, in ink that matched my own pen, in a hand close enough to my own that I could not immediately prove it belonged to somebody else. I will not tell you what those 4 lines said. I have not shown them to anyone, and I do not intend to. 6 months after that, Delphine called me on a Sunday afternoon. Renee's recovery had continued slowly. She told me, 2 fingers becoming 3, tracking eye movement improving to the point where doctors had begun testing a basic communication system built around blinks, 1 blink for yes, 2 for no. Full recovery remained uncertain, maybe permanently out of reach, but Delphine told me her mother had blinked once, clearly and deliberately, the first time Delphine asked her a direct question since coming home. Delphine had asked if she knew who was sitting beside her. 1 blink, yes. I have thought about that phone call more than almost anything else from that case since it ended. 28 years is a long time to wait for 1 blink of an eye to mean something again, but it meant everything to the person who had spent her whole life without an answer, and I have come to believe that counts as a rule of its own, one nobody ever needed to write down on a tablet or hand me through an earpiece. Some things are worth surviving for even when survival only gives you back a small piece of what was taken. You take the piece you get. You do not walk away from it just because it is not everything you wanted. If you ever find yourself standing in a mall like the one I just described, killing an hour between one store and another, waiting on somebody, take one more look at whatever is standing near the back wall of the store you are in. Most of the time, it is exactly what it looks like. Most of the time.